So we want to talk about how we create human IKs. Now, before I do that, I want to do a quick recap of how we did our mainstream joint structures. Remember this, in the past, or in the last week actually, we did this. We said we could go into our rigging application panel on the top left, go to a skeleton, go to create joints. Then I would say 1, 2, for instance 3. These are a bunch of joints. Then I would make it for the entirety of my character. Then I would skin to it, and then I would set my IKs and everything. Before I move on, I want to show you one more thing that we usually do, which we didn't get a chance to do it last week, and that is basically setting controllers. Now let's see what that means. I have this joint structure. I've got 2 joints in here, for instance, or basically 3 joints, but like we discussed, the last joint doesn't really count. So basically 2 joints in here, and I'm going to go to make an object in here. Let's say this is for my cylinder, just like what we did last week. I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle of here. Let's move it to about there. Good. And then what I'm going to be doing next is this. I'm going to say I have a few more segments up here, less segments on the top. And then what we usually did is this. We selected this guy and that guy, the 2 joints. And then I went ahead and I said, let me get a better color here. And then I selected the actual model, the mesh that we want to skin. Then I would go to a skin, bind the skin, and I would go to the option box of it. Once I go in there, I say, selected joints, and I say bind the skin, which basically does this. You can basically animate your models using that. Now, the next thing is that we said we could actually set things such as IKs. So selecting this joint at the top, selecting this joint at the bottom, and making an IK between them, and inverse kinematics. So here, I'm going to go to my skeleton, say create IK handle. When I go there, I select first the top joint, then the lower joint, and then I connect the 2 of them. So from this top joint to that last joint, and basically it creates an IK for me. So I have this part now. There is, however, one more step in here. Let me hide my model. Let me go to a better color so we can see it. And that is basically the controllers. What a controller is basically an object that you use to animate, which is probably simpler to select. That's the definition of it. The only thing that matters is that it's easier for you when you're animating to select that. Now, you might be wondering, why is that important? It's important because when you have a more, a larger character, you will have a lot more controls on them. You will have all the controllers for the different limbs of the character, different fingers, head, eyes, facial expressions, you name it. And because of that, it gets to be a little bit complex to select the different joints. For instance, if I wanted to select this guy and move stuff and then select that IK or do whatever. So to fix this situation, what we do is we basically introduce controllers. Now, controllers are actually very, very simple objects. They're basically any object that we parent to them. Let me show it to you in a separate example first. Let's say here, let's say I have this cube. Right? It's just an object. Right? It's just a box in the middle of my scene, right? And then I'm going to go to this second shelf in here where I can make things such as circles, which basically creates a curve circle. I'm going to create this circle and I'm going to scale it up. So basically like this one. All right. It doesn't matter what the objects are. It's a common convention to use curves such as these ones, simply because they don't render. So they help us do things, but they don't really affect our rendering. But if I have a situation like this, I can actually go to my outliner in here and say the cube becomes a child of the circle. So I parent them together. So I'm going to call this one circle, and that one I'm going to call it cube. So what's happening is that this object now, the circle now, controls the position, the rotation, and everything of my cube. And that's what we call a controller. It's basically an object that controls the other one. Why do we make them like this? Because it makes it easier, for instance, to select them. It makes it easier so that we don't render them or matters as such. So a controller by itself isn't really a thing. It's just a bunch of objects that they control the other ones. You can use any object, but the common convention is using curves for them, or basically lines, things such as this one. like a circle, like a square, like, you know, free form lines or anything like that. So how do we use it if we had a joint structure? If I had a joint structure like this one, like the one we had a second ago, let me hide this object. So here I have that joint at the top, like this one, and then I have these other ones. So I want to have one controller for the top of my object and one controller for this guy, the IK that I can select. So for instance, I would do this. I would say make a circle. This circle, I would move it right there, so it's perfectly aligned to there, maybe a little bit larger so it's easier for me to select, right? Then I would make another circle. I put it at the bottom in here, put it somewhere like that, right? So I have these two. Now remember, we can rename them properly. This guy, I'm going to call it main CTRL, and then this guy I'm going to call it, for instance, IK CTRL. So they're basically two very simple objects. To the main one, I'm going to say this entire joint structure, I'm going to select the main and say P, parented. So the main controller now controls everyone. Very good. Then I'm going to go ahead and say the IK becomes a child of the IK CTRL. So this controller basically controls the position of the IK. Now, if I move this top object, I basically want to be able to move everything together. So what I could do is I could actually select my IK CTRL, the controller for it, put it under my child, under my main controller as a child. So now if I select this one, it moves everything. If I select the next one, it moves the IK. Now, the structure in which you make these, it really depends on the needs of your project and your character, basically. But the essence of it is as simple as this. You make one object, child of another object, and that's what the controller means. One object is a child of the other one. There are some more advanced way of doing them, such as using the constraints, but for now we can just stick to just parenting objects to another. Remember, last week I introduced you to something called a pole vector. A pole vector was an object like this one. So if I create myself a locator like that, and I put my locator in here in front of this joint, then I could go ahead and say these two between them make a constraint of pole vector. So now this guy, the pole vector, basically decides about the rotation of my object, right? So this is basically another controller. So this one I'm going to call it pole vector CTRL, right? Now here's the thing. If I move this main controller somewhere, I want that pole vector to come with me. So I'm actually going to select that and put it under my main controller. So I'm going to press P. So basically in my outliner becomes the main controller. Then there is this guy, the other controller. Then there is the pole vector. And then there is the joint structure. Sometimes when you're doing parenting and stuff, Maya automatically adds this little node, the transform node. That's because of the orientations of the objects are different. You don't really need to worry about it, just let it be there. But what has happened now is that I can select this object, move it around, then use these other guys to do all of my controls or whatever. So what's the advantage of doing this system? I'm going to come in here, say, let's go through everything in my outliner. Here, I don't want to see either of the joints, so I'm going to select all of them, go to display, hide selection. So I hide all of those. I don't want to see my IK, so IK and the pole vector of it, I don't want to see it, display, hide selection. So basically I just have these three controllers. These are the only objects I actually want to see in my screen. And if I look at my actual model, now I can select these three controllers and do all sorts of animations that I want to be doing. If I want to get some sort of a position with this, I only use the controllers. So that's basically the last part of doing any rigging. You draw your skeleton. These are my skeleton objects basically. Those. Then you set up your IKs and matters between them. And then you set up your controllers. The controllers will help you animate your objects and move them around with ease, whether that is you or whether you're asking actually somebody else to do the animation for you if you have an animator. So your animators would never know where the joint structure and stuff are. They would only know where these controllers are. So they basically learn how to animate using these controllers. Now, I bring this up to you simply because when we do the human IK, it also has an entire section which is dealing with the controllers, and it makes the controllers automatically for us. I just wanted us to know what the controllers are. So I'm actually going to select both of these, right? I'm going to group them together. I'm going to call it custom controllers. So this is the one that we made ourselves. Now let's look at how the human IK actually works, what we want to talk about today in this lesson. I'm going to go to the rigging subsection or the application panel. In here, I'm going to go to skeleton. I'm going to look for the human IK. This is basically where the menu for creating human IK will pop. So I'm going to say human IK, and this window opens on the right corner of your screen. This is where you actually can see your human IK menu. So it basically becomes right there on the right side of the screen. And the very first thing you want to do in your human IK is that you want to say create a skeleton. The menu at the very, very top of it. So I'm going to say create a skeleton. And it basically makes a skeleton which is for a biped character. A character that, like a human, has got 2 legs and 2 arms and a bunch of fingers and a spine and a head. There are a lot of settings in here that you can change. For instance, you can change the number of the joints on the spine. If for whatever reason your character needs more than 3, I could go in here and say make them 5. So it basically adds more. If you're making a character that needs to be able to bend further, you can change that. Same thing you can apply to the neck, for instance. You can say the neck of it is actually made of 4 joints, for instance, so it's got more joints in there. So it automatically makes a lot of these things. Same thing, for instance, the feet or the toes. In here, if you want, I can say the toes, actually they have a lot of different toes. If you're making a character that needs all of these, also for a character that maybe you're modeling some sort of an animal that you want to rig it that would require further joints in here, you can actually apply them in here, or you could leave it as a default mode, which is kind of sufficient for most biped characters. Now the next thing that becomes important is that, well, this character is being built at a certain size. That's not always the size of your character. You can't be hopeful that it's going to be exactly what it's going to fit your character. So you have this little scale in here that you can basically scale the entirety of character, larger or smaller. Let's say I'm going to make it twice as big, so it becomes twice as big. Or I could actually go in here and I could move them one at a time. So I could basically go ahead and say move this joint to here. Now something to keep in mind is that we only deal with the left side of the character, which is basically these joints. We don't ever worry about the right side of it, simply because we can actually apply the changes from the left side to the right side. There's a little button in here where I'm holding my mouse button and the tooltip is showing up, which says mirror left to right, which basically says whatever changes you have made to the left side of this joint structure, I'm going to apply to the right side of this joint structure. So for instance, if I go in here and say my character looks like this, for whatever reason it's got such huge hips and the legs are crooked for whatever reason, is like that, and then maybe the arms are like this. Once I'm happy with this situation, I could actually go in here on this button, the button that says mirror left to right. I can press on it and it basically is gonna mirror the left side to the right side, so my character becomes symmetrical again. However, what you usually want to be doing, or not usually, you absolutely want to be doing, is you want to set your character based on your model. So if you have a 3D model, then we make it based on that. I don't have a 3D model in here, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get a model from the content browser. So here I'm going to go ahead and say, let's delete this one. We don't really need this character. So everything is fresh. I'm going to go to Window, General Editors, Content Browser. This is where I can actually get some basic shapes and model, including models of humans, basically. So I'm going to say Content Browser. In the Content Browser, I'm going to go to Examples, Modeling. In the Modeling, I'm going to go to Sculpting, I'm going to go to bipeds, which is basically this series. So if you have a few different, models in here, I'm going to choose this one, which is, it says robot humanoid, but it's actually really like a human. So I'm going to say import this. I'm going to right click on it and say import. And basically imports this model to my scene, which is a very, very low polygon model. It's really nothing very impressive. It doesn't really have any actual stuff in it, but it gives me some sort of an indication, some sort of a reference point for how I should make my my human IK. So again, I'm going to go to the skeleton. In the skeleton, I'm going to go to the human IK. It's going to pop this window on the far right corner. I'm going to say create a skeleton. Once it does, I have to now adjust this skeleton based on my model. I could actually go to show and go X-ray joints, which basically shows me the joints throughout everything, which is very useful whenever we want to see the joints. So I'm going to say, let's not have this shading, X-ray joints, so I can see the joints. I'm also going to say shaded, wireframe unshaded. Then I'm going to go to the front view and I'm going to remind myself only on the left side. So this one I'm going to move to about there. This joint I'm going to move it to about in the middle there for the knee. This one I'm going to push it to about there. Then I'm going to look at from the side view to make sure I put it in the right place. That is kind of the place. This last joint I'm going to put it there, so almost there. All right, so only one side of the character, right? Not both sides of it, only the left side of the character. Then we're gonna go to the upper torso section. That's where the chest area is. I'm gonna say, let's push this a bit higher, and this neck maybe about there. This shoulder joint maybe about there. This one around there, not there, there. Then I'm actually going to rotate everything a little bit, so to about there, and I'm going to actually move this around there, maybe rotate it a little bit more to there. Again, you could actually perfectly match all of these. I'm not going to really bother with perfectly matching all of the joints, but you can understand, how it works. I'm actually going to move from the top, the shoulder joint. I'm going to move it in the middle to somewhere like there, so that's better. Then this joint for the wrist, I'm going to move it to about there. And I could really quickly try to fix the position of the fingers as well, just a tiny bit of it, because the fingers aren't very well modeled in this default object, so it doesn't really matter how far I push them, but it would be something like this one anyway. And then here. All right, so more or less this is how it would be on one side of my character. Obviously, I need to apply this to the other side as well. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to select the mirror left to right, which basically mirrors this to the other side. I'm going to do that. And now we've got our character laid out properly for both sides of this model. The next part of it is basically two folds. One of them is skinning this, which is the same process as the skinning as we have seen before. There's really nothing new about it. And then the other part of it is something new, which is making the controllers. The controllers are the one that we saw today. So I'm going to go through both of these separately. The first part is I'm going to select this middle joint, and that's something that we can find in here. This is the main joint of the entire joint structure. So there's so many joints in this character. Obviously, it goes from top of the head all the way to each of the toes. It begins from the root node, that is the main joint of the hips, and then it's got the left side, and it's got the right side, and it's got the spine. It's got all of these different sections. All I'm going to do is I'm going to select the main joint in here. Then I'm going to select my model, and I'm going to go to the skin, bind the skin. I'm going to go to the option box, and here, other than the as opposed to what we did last week that was selected joints, I'm actually going to go and say joint hierarchy, or I could just reset the settings, and that would be all I have to do in here. I have to reset the settings, select the main joint, select my model, and hit apply. So now everything is now skinned, so I can actually select this guy and I can move it. But there is another step in here, which is basically having all the controllers that they really help us animate or pose or move our object. So to do that, I'm going to come in here in my main window of the human IK on the right side of the screen. Right now we are on a tab called the skeleton. Next to it there is another tab called definition. So let me zoom this out. Yeah, so there is a tab of the skeleton, and then there is a tab of the controllers. So here, what happened to one of my tabs exactly? Give me one sec, see what is my Maya doing exactly. This skeleton is unlocked. Okay, doesn't matter. So here in the definition, on the top right corner of it, we have this little button, the button that says create control rig. That is the second button from the right. So in your character, you basically go to the definition. In the definition, the second button from the right is called create control rig, which when we do that, it basically, what is happening with my character today? Let me see what I did wrong. This is the character that we have. This is the skeleton for it that I have. And here, create control rig. Yes, it takes a little while and it makes this control rig in here, which is very similar to what I had done before. If you remember, before I manually made those curves and I positioned them and I parented the objects. This has done all of those things for me automatically. And to test that, it basically is this. If I select this joint, if I rotate it, if I move it rather, it basically moves that section. If I select the other one, it does for the other section of my character. Now, when you have this, you can basically choose to see it in one of the many different forms. You can actually see it with these curves, like the ones that I was showing you earlier on, or you can click on this little main button, the button that is on top of the human IK section, go to rig control and change the look of it. You can change the rig control to look like, sticks, or you make it look like boxes. I haven't really ever seen anyone using the stick. People either use it in this mode using the boxes, or they use it using the wires, which is basically this one. So we have all of these controls, but we're also seeing all of this random stuff in here, which isn't really good. And there are buttons for it. Again, on the top left corner of it, you can actually show and hide the different objects. So I'm going to say hide these, hide those. You can see or hide your skeleton. And all I want to see is this first one, which are the actual controllers in here. So right now, I have these controllers and I have my actual model. And I could go ahead and use this to control my object. So for instance, if I wanted to make a little bit of a pose, let's say my pose is meant to be, not that, let's say my pose is meant to be like this. Let's say my pose is a character trying to kick a ball. So here is a sphere or a ball. I'm gonna put it in here in front of it, a little bit larger maybe. So that's like a soccer player or a football player. I'm not exactly sure which one is which. So here, I'm actually gonna move this back to about here, rotate it. So this character is getting ready to kick the ball, and then this is the position for it. Maybe the front foot is a little bit to the side in here. Maybe the whole body is rotated a little bit. This hand or this arm basically goes back somewhere like there. The upper chest rotates. One hand is in the front. I don't know if this is the right position, but I feel like this is a character that's about to, kick the ball. And that is, how you set up your human IK, how you use the skeleton of it, how you use the controllers of it. And just as a quick recap for it, you have the skeleton inside, which are, when you turn this on, you can actually see it in here. This is the third button from the left, show hide skeleton. This is the actual skeleton that we don't use for animating, we use for rigging, we use for skinning. Once it is skinned, we use the controllers. These guys to animate our object. Where is our object? Obviously, that is the one we care about. That is our character that we care about seeing where it is and what it does and how it looks like. So we use these controllers to basically get to the position, to the shape, or to whatever that we are trying to do. I feel like maybe for this character, it would actually make sense that this hand was actually in the front, the body was tilted to the other side, and this was the arm that was in the back. Yeah, maybe that would make more sense. Whatever it is that, you know, you guys, will leave it to you guys to come up with the whole creative part of it. You have all of these different controllers. You have, for instance, a pole vector for this, so I can actually move it to here, so I can see it a little bit better. So here, and the head, maybe tilt it a little bit, and then the actual head controller, maybe like that. All right, so that's the idea of using a human IK. There's one more step to this, which is where we can actually load existing animations and we can actually apply them to our model. But I want you guys to give it a try, play around with this a little bit, then I will move on to showing you how we add animations to it.